Hi, I'm Nate, your masculinity and mindset coach. Today I'm in the free weekly calls where I'll be sharing some of the wisdom on masculine frame, followed up by a coaching intervention session. So these are free, details are inside the school community. Today I'm going to be answering one of the questions that was posed by one of our members inside Sovereign Brotherhood. And the question is, do you make loved ones feel safe around you? And there is a second part to that question, but I'm going to answer the first part first. Well, actually, no, I'll go straight into the second part, but I'm going to answer the first part. That's only the first part. Do you put on a false sense of bravery and then fold under pressure when pressure hits? What are some of the real life examples of different false frame archetypes? So I want to address the first part because I feel it taps into, before I go into the discussion of false frames, I feel it taps into integrity and alignment between how you project and portray yourself to be, and then the alignment with how you then, the true results of your expression, how you show up in reality. So, do you make loved ones feel safe around you? This is a multifaceted topic and it's really interesting. So, and funnily enough, it came after I received a compliment today from a woman who said, you know what, I really feel safe around you. And I'm not saying that, I could even probably read it out, but something to the extent of it's something that's not so common. And I just said, look, it's a really beautiful compliment that I received. Thank you. Part of feeling, having people around you feeling safe, it's multifaceted, as I said. I think in this particular context, I'll start with that. It has to do with me not needing something from that person, me being safe in my sexuality, me not needing to prey on the feminine to fulfill a need within myself that I'm denying. So often when men are trying to seek sexual validation, they'll overstep the mark and they make that sexual validation more important than the person in front of them. And that obviously creates a diminished safety for that person because you're not truly caring for the person in front of you, which of course starts from you having a lack of true self-respect and safety within yourself. See, often safety is created within and then it's then expressed to those people around you. Now, why I say safety is multifaceted because there's so many different elements to it. There's emotional safety, there's physical safety, and there's different motivations, compulsions, lack of awareness that can reduce safety for the people around you and for yourself. So integrity is one of the things which is, I believe, is a foundation for safety because when your actions and words are in alignment, you cultivate trust, and trust is one of the elements of safety. Safety is also, like, from an emotional safety perspective, when you show up in a congruent and consistent way, even in challenging environments, people begin to associate that consistency with safety. Also, another reflection of safety, when someone externally to you, especially a woman, is in a place of emotional vulnerability, emotional overwhelm, and you're able to remain calm and still in that emotional intensity, you create safety. And let me just then create an example of the opposites of what would diminish safety. In that same example, if a woman was sharing herself vulnerably in an emotional way, and then you judged her, then you got emotional in response, you took it personally, those sort of things, that diminishes that woman's safety immediately. Because then she feels that she can't actually be helped. She can't express herself in a way where the man can just be still and be a rock and be present. And when a man accepts that woman emotionally, she feels safe. When she feels acknowledged, she feels safe. When she's judged, when she's diminished, when she's rejected, she feels less safe or unsafe. Integrity, as I mentioned, when you say one thing and then do another, that creates uncertainty, that diminishes trust. Therefore, can you really trust that person? There's a degree of safety that begins to be eroded. Now, integrity is so important with regards to safety, because that alignment says that there will be consistency with you as with other people, that the way that you're showing up and what we're agreeing to, you will deliver upon. That when you say you'll be there when I need you, you will be. That when you are saying something like a truth, that there is truth behind it. There's not distortion. There's not a falsity. There's not an absence of truth that could otherwise create a vulnerable situation, especially if you're relying upon that person's word for something at a later date. Now, another component is what I speak to often, which touches on the points I just mentioned, but it's worth going to greater detail, is being externally referenced. When you're externally referenced, you're unstable because you don't have an internal stability. You're very influenced by external influences. You're more likely to change your mind. You're more likely to react to something emotionally externally that's in your environment. You're more likely to change, to conform to the outer world influence because you place power in that external reference point. Those sort of things tell the people around you that you're not strong in your center, that you don't have conviction, that you don't have an inner and congruent alignment with your North Star, with your divine guidance, with your truth, and therefore you can't be trusted. See, the other thing is, the more internally referenced you are, the more that you have a strong sense of self, the less easily you are persuaded, the less easily you are manipulated, and the more self-aware ultimately that you've become. And so this comes into the last part that I want to talk about, which is unconscious patterns and triggers. When we have traumas, it's very common that we react from an unconscious place, because the unconscious trauma, meaning there's some external stimulus, something said or done that we take personally, that triggers us emotionally, that then can escalate into a physical and emotional expression that could potentially cause harm to people around us and ourselves. And these subconscious triggers are automated. They're an automatic response until they're not, until you gain self-awareness and you learn how to, one, observe them, then ideally resolve them, and as a minimum, observe them and pattern interrupt them in order to gain power over them. When you are on autopilot with the subconscious trigger, you're acting typically from a wounded place. You're acting from the emotions, the energy, the intensity of when that initial trauma was created. And so therefore, you're expressing from that place, and you're expressing from a place where you didn't have full resourcefulness, where you didn't have the ability potentially to create safety for yourself. And from the emotional intensities and from the potentially stacked emotions that have been put on top of you since that trauma was created, there is a potentiality that you'll express yourself with a lot of intensity and in a way that will cause harm. So a lack of self-awareness and a lack of conviction towards resolving your subconscious blocks also creates an experience of diminished safety for yourself and others, specifically others. And this is in both men and women, but obviously we're going to be focusing primarily on men right now. So the way around that, of course, as I've kind of alluded to, is to start to heal the subconscious traumas such that you, one, are less likely to be triggered, and two, you become responsive rather than reactive. And from that place, you become a safer man, because even then you'll start to feel these emotions building up and you have the awareness of how you choose to respond. And another thing which really supports that is embodiment exercises, where you begin to develop the ability to have split awareness, which allows you to have awareness on self and awareness on others, such that you don't become associated or deeply immersed in the trigger or trauma that's come to the surface. You still have some of your resources available. So you can remain disassociated from from being completely immersed in your association with with the part of yourself that's being expressed from trauma. So I hope that gives some insights there around safety. So self-sourcing, developing a strong sense of self, healing your subconscious blocks and traumas, learning how to moderate yourself in moments of intensity, so that you can learn how to choose, such that you can choose how you learn how to respond. I'll say that again, such that you can choose how you respond in the context of being triggered or in the context of this external intensity that's being put into your field. And what else is there? Yeah, just operating in accordance with a set of principles and intentions that create well-being for the people around you. That's when you become a well-resourced man, where you start to have additional bandwidth, where you start to move beyond your own overwhelm. You'll have more bandwidth to create well-being for the people around you, and you'll have more capacity to handle the intensities of others. And so the final point I'll make on that one is you're taking care of yourself. There's a high degree of disciplined self-care, which builds up this resilience and this bandwidth, because you're getting adequate sleep, you're getting exercise, you're meditating, breath work, things like this, which will cultivate a calmness within yourself. When you're overwhelmed, when you're lacking sleep, when you're poorly nourished and lacking nutrition, when you're in a chaotic state of mind, you'll be easily overwhelmed and easily reactive to the circumstances around you. So obviously there's a requirement there for this disciplined self-care. The second part of that question was to do with false frames. And this is a whole nother area, but I'll get into it. The false frame is typically a strategy where you're getting results, where you know a behavior works, even if you don't fully believe, or even if you don't fully have an identity that's congruent with the behavior. So you don't have a subconscious alignment. You've taught yourself certain behaviors that get yourself certain outcomes, and they worked for a period of time, but they may be harmful to yourself and others. And they don't come from a place of true foundation and substance. They come from a place of, how do you say, put on behaviors rather than truly integrated alignment with your identity. So let's get into some of the discussions now around what a false frame is. Now, there are different archetypes that I created, and I listed these in the Sovereign Power workbook that's free inside the Sovereign Brotherhood community. And some of the false frame archetypes, I'll start to go into some detail around. Now, the first is a fuckboy. Now, the fuckboy is a man who gains sexual validation. He'll come across to some extent as having confidence with women. Now, obviously, a framed man, a man who has true authentic frame, is typically quite confident with women because he's a high value man. He knows how to communicate. He's not externally referenced. He has a high inner authority. He's typically worked on himself physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. He becomes a well-rounded and extraordinary man. And obviously that becomes attractive to the feminine. The fuckboy, however, is someone who is externally referenced. He's validation seeking. So often he's learned the art of seduction, yet he's typically not very well-rounded and not able, for instance, to provide, or he's easily emotionally triggered. So essentially what it does is it creates this lack of trust and lack of safety for the feminine, because he portrays himself in a way up front but very quickly the women can observe his initial projections of himself are incongruent with the reality of who he truly is. So he comes across, he's studied some lines, he's studied some pickup techniques, he speaks in a way which is seductive, he shows himself to be confident, but then his life's in disarray. He has no north compass, no purpose, he lacks financial success, he's emotionally unavailable, he's easily triggered, all of these things. And so that's why he's a false framed man, because he doesn't have the authentic substance underneath it that would validate, or that would be congruent, I should say, with the initial impression that he makes. The next part is the rageful father. Now, this archetype is a man who seeks to gain power and control over others through fear. So he rules through fear. Now, that is not a framed man. A man who uses aggression to control the environment is coming from fear, and he lacks true respect from the people around him. He does not create, obviously, safety around him because he's easily triggered, he's easily goes to flights of rage, and people generally fear for their safety when he goes into these circumstances. Even worse is if he's using things like alcohol, which he then has some sort of blackout or disassociation or avoidance of his responsibility for how he shows up. So he causes harm and starts to create, even more trauma through his unrestrained behaviors, through his fits of rage. And so that's often an attempt to gain control over his life, where he feels powerless just in the face of the realities that he's created for himself. So this is not a healthy archetype of the masculine. So the false frame element is he comes across as if he's a man of power, but it's not true authentic power. It's not earned through respect and consistency and discipline. It's created through fear, and that's not true masculine frame. The macho meathead. So it's a similar one to the rageful father. He shows himself to be this dominant macho man, but he lacks potentially connection to his emotions and his ability to moderate his emotions. He's often seeking validation externally through grand gestures of his dominance. And he typically does not gain respect from people. Again, he tries to lead through fear and doesn't gain respect from others. And so he doesn't have a strong authoritative presence in a way that brings the best out of people. It's a temporary control over people that submit to his acts of dominance and aggression, but it's not dominance to empower himself and others. It's dominance for control over others, and that's not true frame. The next one, the feminist warrior. So we've seen these keyboard warriors. They're these gallant white knights who stand with conviction for feminist ideologies, and they attack anyone in online forums in the hope that they will gain some sort of approval from the feminine. See, they're often men that lack a lot of interest from the feminine, and because they're typically not very masculine men at all, typically very feminine men. And it's based on a rejection of the masculine or a shame around the masculine, where the expression of this shame is too much for them to face. And so they reject their own nature. And instead, they start to identify with feminist ideologies in an attempt to be accepted and fit in with the women from that perspective by shaming and diminishing the masculine. And you'll often see them start to dress more in a feminine way. You'll start to see them express themselves in ways which are against masculinity itself. And these are from, biological males. And so obviously the false frame there is they're incredibly externally referenced is one thing, because they're seeking validation and acceptance externally whilst rejecting themselves. And they lack this direction and purpose in life, and they don't ultimately seek to raise the well-being of themselves and others. They seek to benefit from trying to diminish another or attacking another. It's obviously not true masculine frame. Another one is the disconnected gamer. So these guys that disconnect from society, they have given up in a way. They feel overwhelmed by life and they seek to escape from it. And obviously he lacks masculine frame because he doesn't believe in his own power. He doesn't believe he has the capacity to change his life circumstances, so he seeks to escape from them. And this man often lacks self-awareness and true awareness of the people around him, because he's immersed in these alternate realities. He's not meeting his own, and he's not working to change his own reality for the better. The next is the subservient husband. So this is the man who lives in the shadow of his partner. He's typically disconnected from life. He's given up his own internal authority and submitted to the external authority of the woman in his life, who often demonstrates very masculine traits. And he becomes submissive and often silently bitter and resentful. He's often lacks polarity in a relationship. He's not well sexed. And the false frame is that he can even put on the idea that he's got a relationship through tolerance of each other, but really he's not standing in his own authority, and he's not leading, he's not creating life in a way which creates a better, trajectory for everyone. He's given up by life and he's waiting for the time to pass by. I got another one. This one's the Instagram assistant. so so you'll often see these men carrying handbags, they'll be carrying the phones, they'll be orientating around the social influencer, and sometimes these are good looking guys, often very effeminate guys, but certainly men that lack any sort of conviction and power. And so they've given up their internal authority, and again they've become submissive to the more dominant woman, who potentially tolerates him because he's compliant, and he may even have money and he's paying her way. And for that reason, the fact that he's externally referenced, he's given up his authority, he lacks masculine frame. The next is the spiritual nice guy. So I see this, obviously I'm in Tulum, I see this in places like Tulum, Bali. You see very feminine guys who are very flowy in the way they dance, and sometimes they're spiritual fuckboys as well. But let's do the nice guy version. They're afraid to offend people. They're very heart connected, but they don't stand in their authority. They boys that never became men, and they seek to conform or essentially get laid by trying to get spiritual girls by coming across as spiritual. So it's persona, and their endeavors to conform, to be compliant, to not shake the boat, to not be aggressive, are all signs that they lack masculine frame, because they won't stand for the truth, and they won't stand up if they feel that their status might be reduced in some way. And so they become this compliant conforming, which is an external referencing, which relates to a lack of masculine frame. The next is the charismatic clown. Now, these are the entertainers, and they seek to gain approval and acceptance by being the entertainer, by being the clown, the court jester. And having an external reference, ultimately they believe that they are not going to be loved and accepted. And this is obviously coming from some shame or lack of self-love and self-respect within, that they are then pursuing that externally. And so rather than focus on themselves and building up their self-respect and self-esteem, they look for the continual reassurance that they're accepted by others by being performers for others. The next one is the simp. And now this is the guy who tries to buy his way into acceptance. So, there's elements of this, as I mentioned before, potentially in people like the Instagram assistant. The simp seeks acceptance by paying for his way. So there's a compensation for his own lack of self-worth. And because he doesn't have high esteem, because he'll tolerate behaviors such as the demanding woman, such as a woman who expects him to pay for everything, and they ended up in a trading relationship where she doesn't truly respect him, and his wallet gets drained, and often she's getting turned on by other men and seeking externally because she doesn't truly respect him. She just appreciates what he's giving her. So the next one, so obviously he likes frame. The next one is the cuck. Now this is a man who farms his woman out to other men, and he'll take the scraps of whatever's given to him. And so obviously he doesn't have a high level of self-respect. He'll tolerate humiliation. He'll tolerate his woman being with multiple other men while giving him token appreciation. Sometimes she's not even giving him sex. She's just giving, he's also a simp who's also paying her way, and she's living off him, but then getting her sexual fulfillment through other men. And obviously he's not a framed man because he lacks inner authority. He lacks the respect that would prevent these behaviors that would otherwise reduce his value, his esteem, through humiliation and through the direction of her attention, time, and sex towards other men. And the next one, I'll finish the last one, and that's the apathetic artist. And now, this is someone who lacks conviction and direction in life. They often lack self-worth. They're often the struggling artist that has no conviction and endeavor in life. They can be charismatic at times. They can be deeply emotional and feeling. Sometimes they're highly reactive. Now, there's different aspects of why they have frame. Often they're externally seeking, some sort of approval or validation through their gifts, their talents. Often they have avoidance tactics that, rather than speaking with conviction and authority from a place of truth, they seek to avoid confrontation, and they, recess back into their cave, back into their art, and they can be quite avoidant. And so because they don't have a strong internal frame of reference, because they aren't strong in their identity, they are often avoidant in their personalities. So they lack frame. So I hope this has been helpful. And if you have some questions on masculine frame, please send me some messages. Obviously, a person with true authentic frame is someone who has a strong purpose in life and direction in life, is someone who consistently shows up in congruent right action towards that North Star, is someone who is self-sourcing, is disciplined for self-care and builds themselves up, and does not seek externally. And so he naturally is attractive and magnetizes the reflections of the high esteem and high regard that he has for himself. And through his consistency, he fosters trust because he has integrity with his word. He has consistency in the way that he shows up. He's resilient to external influences, so he's non-reactive and he responds in an empowering way. And these are all ways that over time build up trust. So the way to be developing yourself as a safe man is by building your masculine frame. Again, I hope this has been useful. Thanks for watching this component. Now we're going to be going into the breakthrough session for the second part. All right. Okay, so we're going to go into the coaching session now. And Carl here, he just mentioned that what he wants to focus on is the ability to lean into the unknown, the ability to face uncertainty with an empowered and resourceful state, such that you can have confidence that you'll prevail even in areas where you maybe are not so familiar. So let's get to the heart of it. Firstly, there's a context. You're starting a new business, I think. Yeah. So you're starting a business and you have some uncertainty. And how is that a problem for you? What's actually happening for you now? What do you notice? Just give me a bit more of an insight into, okay, I decide I want to take action, for instance, and then I find myself hesitating. Or, what's the actual, give me a bit more of an insight into the problem that brought you here.
I've never started or owned or operated a business of any kind in the past.
Right.
This is completely new territory for me, let alone the possibility of in the future having employees, all the legal stuff that goes along with that. Because if you mess something up legally, that can land you in major hot water. And it is a vast world to, jump into head first.
So what I hear you say is, when you think about the idea of starting your own business, which is new to you, of course, anything you get into that you've never been before, you're going to experience uncertainty because you just haven't experienced it before. It's a brand new experience. What's coming up for you though is what you're associating with that uncertainty, and you're associating with potential loss of safety, you know, potential threats. Meaning, all right, if I go there, I could be sued. So just notice your mind is loading up pain. So when you associate uncertainty, you're not associating with there could be good things coming, which is why you're starting a business in the first place, like freedom, like new opportunities, like expanding your potential, growing as a man, meeting new people, adventuring, being able to travel, becoming financially free. Your mind doesn't associate positive outcomes with leaning into the unknown in the area of business. You associate negative outcomes. And so we're hardwired at our subconscious mind to move towards that which we associate with a positive kinesthetic experience, which means something that feels good. And we tend to avoid things that we associate with a negative kinesthetic experience, something that feels bad. So your subconscious mind is working against you when it comes to leaning into the unknown and taking action with regards to your business, because you have a negative subconscious association, a negative kinesthetic association with leaning into the unknown in business. All right. So now there are elements to be aware of. There are things to be considerate of to ensure the highest probability of success, the highest probability of harmony, and avoidance of any risks that could cause problems. But the foundation still has to be something in terms of your association with a positive feeling of moving into it, or else you're working against yourself. So let's unpack it a little bit. What might happen? You've already given some hints, but what might happen if you start this business and were to start taking consistent action in alignment with the outcomes of the business? What might happen? And I don't want you to think the answer. I just want you to blurt the answer.
Long term, I could have a company that is worth multiple millions of dollars, something I could pass down to my children, have a good foundation for literally starting to build a new civilization from the ground up.
All right. That sounds incredible. Now, if that was the only thing that was occupying your mind, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So what's the more prevalent reality that's coming to light for you? What's the more prevalent thing that your mind's been entertaining that's been causing the uncertainty and you not taking action? What might happen?
It could fail or take significantly longer to reach a significant enough level of
Mm,
success that I can provide for myself exclusively through that channel,
got
especially
it.
if I either decide to quit my current job or put all my time into this just for it to completely flop or take multiple years before I'm, making enough to provide for myself.
So it could fail, or it could take a long time where you're not able to provide for yourself during that time. They're real threats. The reality is that something like 90+% businesses fail even in the first year.
Mm-hmm.
And often it takes up to 5 years before you actually become highly profitable or more. That's also true. So the best way to avoid fear, or to overcome fear, I should say, not avoid, the best way to overcome fear is to meet the fear. So accept that it might be a reality, accept it might take you 5 years, and accept that you might have to have 2 jobs during that time. Now, do I wish that for you? No. Does it have to be that way? No. If you've got a mentor, if you've got clarity, if you're got very specific and aligned way that you're going about your endeavors to optimize your probability of success, then you can do it a lot quicker. And especially if you're following models that are already working, all right, and taught to you by people that are doing those models and being successful themselves. So there's what I'm saying though, there is a real risk, a real threat. There is a real threat and risk to that. All right. And so what you're doing is you're loading up the pain associated with that valid risk. So what you need to do is to mitigate that risk. You need to get clear on your outcome, but you need to think of, okay, what would mitigate those risks? And I gave you some pointers there. You find a business model that will work, that's going to be aligned with how you want to show up. You find a mentor who's successful in that arena. And the next thing is you get strategic, right, about how you're going to work, having accepted that it could take you 5 years. It may take you a lot less, but it could take you 5 years. So how I did this is I committed that I was going to start a business. All right. Maybe I was more naive. Maybe I didn't care. I don't know. But when I jumped in, I threw myself into my business, totally expecting that it's going to succeed. Now, the reality was different after 3 years and I was working 90 odd hours a week for 3 years straight. I was working 2 and often 3 jobs between those a week to make that happen. So as I was starting my tea beverage business in Australia, I was working in cafes. I was also migrating out of a previous full-time position that I had as a consultant for a large plumbing company in Australia. That was my first job out of university. So I was basically supplementing my income. So you can do so much of that, DoorDash and Uber Eats and those sort of things. There's different ways you can do it. You can also leverage off income. It might be cleaning lawns, washing cars. You can do all sorts of stuff. If you can somehow get a cash-based job where you can earn income in your neighborhood, even 2 days a week, that makes sure you've got your foundations covered, and then you slowly allocate more and more time to your full occupation, then that in your chosen field, the optimized field, then that's a good way to transition. Another thing is being around people who are success focused and, minimize your expenses, meaning I'm not saying you have to live out of your car, that's an option, but you can live in a house with many other people sharing that house. Ideally, they're going to be men that want to succeed in life. So you're around a good energy who are getting fit together. Even if you're living off packet noodles, eggs, and bread, you do what you can to get started. But the most important thing is the willingness to face discomfort, the willingness to meet that pain no matter what. Now, many people who embark have no awareness of how to succeed. They have no mentor, they have no guidance. They're not taking care of themselves. And to some extent, this is what I was doing. If I'm completely honest, when I started off, I was working 90 hours a week. I was overwhelmed. I wasn't taking care of myself. I was reading books, but I didn't have any mentors. And it took me longer than it probably should have. In the end, I made a lot of mistakes, but I became successful. Well, the things I did right was, I was supplementing my income. I was living in shared accommodation. I was keeping my expenses low. You know, I would, I was working in a pizza restaurant when I first started out, and I would take home food from that to load myself up. So I had to take, I was able to take a family sized pizza home, and then I'd live off that for the next 2 days or so. I would get food from going to networking events and other things where I could interact with other people and get drinks and stuff like that. Um, so what I'm saying is, you have a clear idea of what you want to create and where you're going, and you just completely commit to that. You will develop high level of resilience. And so there are websites that I look at of people who have got business models. This is on Instagram. People who say, hey, this is a business model that'll work. This is a business model that'll work. And often they're very low investment to get started. But there's something which can get returns on that investment pretty quickly. You just pause. I'm going to wait a second. So what I'm saying is, go find a business model that can work. Now, ideally, you want to be in a place of where you're passionate, but often when you're moving into a place of where you're passionate, getting the awareness of exactly the business model, getting awareness of the exact product, those sort of things take some time. But ultimately, you want to be in an environment where it's a blue ocean, and you've got people guiding you, giving you some insights, people who've started their own business, especially, and become successful, and then choosing that area. So I believe you should start. Some people say just start on anything. I believe ideally you want to start in an area passionate in, or have experience in some capacity that you can leverage off, so you're not completely starting from scratch. So I had worked in hospitality most of my childhood. From my first job, I should say, from 16 through university, I was working in hospitality the whole time. The first company I started was in supplying the hospitality industry. I already had awareness of that, industry. Obviously, I didn't know how to run a business. I was in a complement to the industry and not the industry itself. But that gave me enough foundations to know that I was not in completely unfamiliar waters. So a lot of what I'm sharing are very practical things, right? Because I think, and obviously you can be showing up to these calls to remove subconscious blocks as well. But it's whenever you're starting a business, obviously you're going to be solving a challenge or a problem. And ideally, it's an area that you have interest in, so you can research and so you can move towards it. A lot of people start things like trading and those sort of things. Again, a very small percentage of those traders actually make money. They make money when there's a bull cycle, but many of them don't make money when it's not. And so it's also about having the strategies that can work in any market. So the way that I would look about it, and so there's so many different things: drop shipping, flipping properties. There's so many other different areas, and choose an area that most interests you. If you've got carpeting and knowledge and doing up houses, then get close to someone. This is another strategy. If you can't afford coaching, if you can't afford mentorship, then get close to someone who is in an area that you really like. You just pause and then learn from them. So I'll pause again. The signal's dropped out again, Carl. So I'll finish it for those who are following me in the recording. Your signal's a bit down, so you're dropping out. So if you get close to someone who's in an area that you want to master, then get close to them and see if you can support them, see if you can learn their business model, see if you can be around them. And if you're around highly successful people and you're supporting them, often they'll create opportunities for you. So instead of paying to go to university, think about investing your time in exchange to learn from someone. And they may even be willing, if you make yourself indispensable, to start paying you. And they may want to see you succeed and thrive, particularly for an upstanding lad like yourself. So what I'm saying is, You may need to relocate. There's a risk, but you can live with a friend. You can live with a family member. Get close to someone that you really admire and respect and see how they make, and then someone who's successful in the area that you want to be successful, and then get close to them. All right. So a lot of what I'm suggesting to you is practical strategies, because I think that it's natural to have that fear. But if you had have given me a unrealistic reason for that fear, then I would have addressed it at a subconscious level. But I actually think your fears are valid, right? So my strategy there would be more to mitigate those by becoming informed. Clarity helps resolve fear. So when you're clear on your strategy, you're clear on your path, you're clear on your outcome, you're clear on the people who are going to support you to get there, you're clear that you can manage your basic expenses as you moved along that path, that you've got a fallback plan, that if it doesn't succeed, you've got that as well. Then you can start to mitigate that. But when I did it, the other thing that I had, which was on my side, was I had a business partner that was in it with me. And I was overwhelmed. I was not self-caring myself. I was working long hours, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone really, but it's what gave me tremendous resilience to persist even when things aren't going so well. So there is something about developing your frame during that. But like I said, I would actually start by going from the ideal life you want to create for yourself, your perfect day. Then I would look at what kind of the things that you really love. And there's a great book I think called "What Color Is My Parachute?" It just comes to mind. It's basically that most people don't realize that they have skill sets that are applicable across a lot of different industries and contexts, right? And so the concept here is, what are you good at? Is it relating to people? Is it evoking trust? Is it speaking? Whatever it might be. You can learn anything as well, but it has to be in an area. See, for me, when I first started my business, the things that I actually wanted was to travel and see the world. I loved hanging out in restaurants and cafes because that was a big part of my lifestyle. And I loved the idea of doing something good and eating healthy. So I created an organic beverage company, and I ticked the boxes. I traveled to like now 40 countries or close to, and I ended up with supplying 4,500 cafes. That same company now that I've exited from is now supplying something like 6,500 cafes. I traveled around Asia and Australia, and I supplied the very best in the industry for what they did. I moved to the US, and then I finally found myself here, and then I exited. So don't underestimate the power of really articulating the ideal life, the ideal person that you wish to become and create for yourself, right? Start with that, and then consider what kind of things would you like to experience, and then allow yourself that influence. See, a friend of mine wanted to become a pilot. Now, he had really low grades, right? He had like 32 or something out of 100. He couldn't get into anything basically unless the worst course that in the worst university, basically. And he's in this program. He's like, I want to become a pilot. I want to become a pilot. Somehow he ends up sitting next to a guy on a plane who was a pilot. And he was on the way to visit his family. His parents had separated. So he had a broken home kind of situation. And he ended up sitting next to this guy, learning about flight school, somehow, through the gift of the gab, talked his way into a flight school and through his university, and ended up getting into a program somehow, magically, for something that he had like a 30s score. This was in the high 90s. And he talked about that he had a broken family, but he was completely committed. They got an interview. Somehow he got in. And then I remember he told me how he got his first job, which relates to what I was sharing earlier. He offered to wash planes for a guy. And the guy's in the interview goes, okay. He goes, but you don't really want to wash planes, do you? He goes, no, I really want to fly them. And he goes, well, do you know what you're talking about? Have you studied the flight, manuals and laws and things like that, and FAA and all this stuff? He goes, yes. He's like, all right, prove it. And he asked this guy asked him a question. And my friend gave an answer. and this is a guy who's been in 20 years in the industry, said, nope, what you said is not true. And he goes, no, I'm pretty sure it is. He goes, prove it. He pushes the flight manual or regulations towards the book, towards him. He opens up the flight regulations to the exact page. And he said, oh, here it is. He turns the regulations back to him. The guy's like, I'll be done. You got a job. That's how he got his first job. So this is what I want to say is that I do believe we have a destined path. And I think if you're clear on where you want to go in life, if you have this deep passion of what you want to create for yourself, something that's deep inside of you that's motivating you towards that, then move towards that. Don't give up on your dreams. Move towards your dreams. Move towards your inspiration. And you'll find that if it's the right aligned path, opportunities will open up for you. And like my friend, he made things happen. He knew that's what he wanted. He's like, how do I get people that are in the field, get close to people that are in the field that I want to be in? How do I get the knowledge that I need? And he was volunteering his time, his energy. He ended up talking his way into courses that most people would say, oh, that can't be done. He tried at least, you know? So there's some recommendations and a bit of a pep talk. Decide on where you want to go in life and move towards it. I wanted to have a life of travel. I loved hanging out in cafes and restaurants because I love food. I love cooking. I love that culture in Australia of sitting inside cafes and coffee. And I competed in the Brewster Championships, even if I wasn't in the coffee business. That ended up being a stroke of genius because it introduced me to all the coffee roasters and ended up becoming a larger supplier of tea to coffee roasters in Australia, 3 times more than any competitor. And that's what gave me a foundation towards a new path to market that no one else was using. Right. So sometimes, like I said, there are hidden little opportunities that are presented. And even though I wasn't making money for the first 5 years, we hired some mentors. They helped to manage our cash flow. Next thing you know, we're making money. And we put on millions of dollars of revenue in the next 2 years. But I was willing to endure. I was willing to do it, to stick it out as I was learning what I didn't know inside that industry. As I was learning, and we changed the business model like 3 or 4 times. We tried a bunch of things that didn't work. Eventually, we found out what worked, doubled down, committed, and then we had a breakthrough moment. So business is a long game. Can people make money quickly? Yes, but typically it's the preparation of the mind, the skill set, and the business models and things like that that are required before you have that breakthrough moment. So just think of it more like an apprenticeship. I want to do an apprenticeship in something. I want to learn how to become successful in something. Choose that path, get close, get aligned, and then see how you can make that happen. That would be my recommendations for a person in your situation.
This is very encouraging because a lot of what you're saying, I feel like I either have begun to learn or naturally already gravitated in that direction. So it's encouraging to know that I am, it might be because I already went through the 12-week program once. So I, kind of had those little nuggets here and there. I have a clear idea of the service slash product that I'll be
Mhm.
providing. I'm about 50-60% finished with getting pricing stuff worked out.
Good.
So I do feel like I have a very strong lead of, where I'm going, how it's going to work. There's virtually no startup cost.
Right.
So
So
I'm encouraging.
my final comment is study the best in the industry and emulate them, then seek to be the best, seek to overtake them. The biggest change that happened in our business is when we decided to become the best tea company in the world. And I'm like, well, what would I need to do that? I need to become the expert in tea. I need to travel. So then I went to like 180 tea farms throughout Asia. I set up the Australasian Specialty Tea Association. So I set up the governing body that would put me in contact with all the other different people and suppliers. And I would also give me status inside the industry. I then started a tea competition inside China with a partner, became the largest tea brewing competition in China. I became an official envoy running these competitions, even at the largest tea expo in China. So it's like seek to find the best in the industry. They will hold a position of status and power and respect. seek to find out how they do the things, and then go, where can I improve upon this? And then tailor it for your own path. And when you solve a bigger problem, when you solve it in a better way, and typically the more specialized you become, the better you are at it. And what I did is, at the time, I went to a market where tea wasn't valued, and I also sold drinking chocolate that wasn't valued in cafes. It was all low quality. I went for a high quality product that didn't have competition, where there was sufficient margins at low volume to run a business from. Right. And in the end, we started to get scale and volume, and we leveraged off other people in the industry. So we started our tea business by taking up space in other people's containers until we outgrew them. Then we went our own path. He was in a non-competing industry, but he would make margin off what we would, but it still worked out cheaper than if we would have air freighted ourselves. So we were able to buy, he was making margin off the shipments of goods, and we had access to his terms and things like that. Again, part of that was good fortune. Things just happened to work out for us. And I believe that when you're in an aligned path, you will be supported. You will be supported. And it's not to say it wasn't difficult. Like, I was stressed out of my head. I was grinding my teeth in my sleep. I was overwhelmed because I was in an area that was out of my depth, because I'd never run my own business before. And I wasn't financially successful in the first 3 years as a minimum. Then my mum died in the middle of that. But what I did was have conviction and a vision that I was not willing to give up on, no matter what. And I think if you have that level of resolve, you will be successful, because you're not accepting any other choice. It's just every obstruction that you meet and move beyond is an obstruction where another person quit, and then you just kept going. And so you move to advance even more towards this success where someone else chose to give up on their dream, their aspiration. So just have a level of conviction is, I will succeed no matter what, and you will.
Would a lot of this advice, would you say that still applies if I'm looking at a business or business model that from my research, there are few, if any, other businesses doing exactly there are some that are doing something similar, but not they are adjacently related, but I plan to do things a little bit differently.
Yeah. So
It's
then
not
you got to find out what the value drivers are. So what in a context, and this is something like a blue ocean strategy, is another book. So I started to read a lot of books during this time as well. And one of the things is, you want to find points of differentiation on value, their value propositions. So you could be in the same context, but your people, the way you solve a problem creates value by solving specific, framed around like the solution provides framed around a specific problem. If you solve a bigger problem or a different problem to the same audience, then they might see yours as having greater value. So example, when I was selling tea to my market, I was competing with everyone else who was selling tea. And it was just really about the convenience of who was supplying the tea and maybe quality. But then everyone's saying they've got the best quality and everyone's available. It's not really good point of difference in terms of value proposition. Then I said, no, I'll help to optimize the revenue for your business. Now, if no one else it seems obvious, but if no one else in the tea industry is saying, I'll show you how to make more money per store using beverages, but not just selling tea, by showing an approach to service, a philosophy around this, the knowledge, the expertise, then all of a sudden, people that don't care about tea do care about making money. So we started to become consultants for optimizing revenue, right? And so if we would go to a franchise group and say, we'll help to increase your revenue by $250 to $350 per store, what's that worth to you? Is it worth spending a few extra cents or per tea? Because it's a low cost, high margin product. But like, makes sense. Can we do a trial? Like, we'll take the risk. We'll help you in a couple of your stores to show that we can achieve this. They choose some good performing stores. Next thing you know, we're making the money. They say, we love this. What else have you got? Oh, well, we're also doing these other health beverages, turmeric lattes, matcha. And next thing you know, we're supplying everything else, a big share of the products inside that particular business. So the answer is, find the point of value differentiation that your customer places the highest value on. And it's about when you can better define your customer's problem and solve it better than someone else, because you understand their true problem better than someone else, they will see you as authority and they will invest in you and they'll trust you more. So seeing markets that are poorly serviced and where the problems aren't being well met are the gold mines. And also interweaving AI and things like that, emerging trends. You can outperform people now. You can also think about so one thing I did really well is I saw where the industry was going, which at the time was the cafes were all in Australia were all moving to specialty products. So they're all crap, cheap products for a long period of time, and we started introducing specialty. So we introduced the word specialty. So specialty tea, specialty drinking chocolate, because specialty coffee had just taken off, and we're like, we're specialty everything else. So we started sourcing, bringing that intentional approach to sourcing, manufacturer selection, packaging, preparation, and I created my own specialty brewing method to optimize the infusion for tea through my own research and experiments. So we became known as the guys who, and that's why that led to the brewing competition that I was telling you about, because I created rules and judging regulations around how tea could be best brewed. So, and then I became the authority in the industry around that. So
All very encouraging to hear because it's reinforcing that again, a lot of the things that I already have done or have come to mind are a lot of the things that you're telling me. So it is encouraging to know that I feel like I am naturally on the right track and helping me
right,
logic through, these things that you're worried about, they are legitimate, but they can be mitigated. All it takes
right.
is a little bit of work and you can,
Mhm.
cut those risks down to as little as possible.
So play the long game, stack probabilities in your favor, get mentorship, have your base food costs, living costs covered as best you can. Don't be afraid to put in extra hours, research, get to master the resolution of that specific problem you're focusing on, and get to know the industry really well. So I got to know the industry really well because I operated inside that industry. But not only that, I started asking like businesses that were solving a different problem. So I started asking the cafe operators, the coffee roasters, their perspectives on the industry and how they went about their products. We're in a non-competing. I was never going to sell coffee, right? So I started finding out intelligence, researching directly. I spent times in cafes observing what were the biggest issues. Oh, brewing methods were an issue. Oh, the way they stored the tea on the coffee machine was an issue. The way they presented the tea was an issue. The way they had it on menus was an issue. Their staff knowledge was an issue. So I started looking at all the problems and I'm like, all right, let me resolve all this. Oh, wow. I've got something that no one else is doing. I've got an approach to increasing sales through this system. I created a system that would solve the problem better than anyone else because no one else even had a system. They would just supply them with tea and then expect, because that's the way it always been done. So having a system that reliably resolves challenges is another way to complement your business value proposition and differentiate it in a way that others will take notice about for. Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up there. Thank you for those who are still watching. Hopefully, maybe it's some of you who are starting your own businesses. I hope this will has been valuable. To recap, mitigate risk. It's okay when you're moving into an uncertain area to feel uncertainty, to feel some sort of fear. But you can mitigate that by taking care of yourself, by seeking to get knowledge from the best in the industry and learn from them, and seeking to surpass them by solving the problems better than them in some capacity, leveraging off complementary businesses who are in a non-direct competitive area. And don't be afraid to ask. Don't wipe off opportunities without having tried things yourself, just like my friend did with flying planes. Thanks for watching. I look forward to seeing you in the next coaching and wisdom sharing weekly call next Friday. Thanks again.
Have a great day.